ज्ञान sir, where's Tazeen?
Hello, Tajin ma'am is not there. Tajin ma'am is supposed to start.
Yes, Tazeen is not, hasn't joined yet. Gyan, ask James to call her up and ask her to join first. You call. सुजीत स्पीकर्स ज्वाइन किए हैं अभी तक? फर्स्ट स्पीकर ज्ञान, जस्ट चेक. Has our resource persons joined?
Okay.
Just check.
The first speaker is also not there.
Not there.
Not there. From Jot Singh.
And the second speaker?
Shreyanshi Chakravarthy, she is not there.
She's also not there. Okay.
ज्ञान सर.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
गुड मॉर्निंग सर. मैंने ना परमजोत सर को लिंक भेजा है. एक बार आप कैसे जानेंगे उनका नंबर? हमको आपको शेयर करना होगा. एक बार 1 मिनट रुकिए, हम देखते हैं.
उनका नंबर शेयर कीजिए.
हाँ, शेयर कर रहे हैं सर. Sujit sir, Dr. Paramjot Singh has joined. Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
And the second speaker hasn't joined yet.
अब
Good morning, ma'am. When are you going to join, ma'am? Okay, now I'll send the link.
Gyan sir, I'll
Yes,
begin sharply at 10:30 or wait for some time.
wait for some time.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. We'll be beginning shortly.
Good morning, Shreyanshi ma'am.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Alpha.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Sir, shall we begin now, sir? Because
Tazeen, wait,
Yes,
Tazeen, Paranjot Singh, sir, voice is echoing.
okay, I'll just
Set the volume.
Doctor, sir, your voice is bit echoing.
Just
Okay.
one more point.
Now, shall I begin? Gyan, sir? Or wait for some time?
Is it all right now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. A bit louder, sir.
Is it okay?
Oh, yes, sir. A bit louder. If it would be better, sir, if a bit louder.
Okay. Is this fine? Okay.
Sir, it is still echoing. The voice is echoing.
I just have one device. Just a minute.
Sir, I think you keep your mobile away from your laptop.
Yeah.
Resounding.
Let us check now. Is it
This
still
is,
echoing?
no, sir, it's
No,
better.
sir, no.
Is it fine now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Very fine. Very fine.
Perfect.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Okay, Tazeen ma'am.
Shall I begin now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
A very good morning to all the A very good morning to all the dignitaries and participants attending the two-day national webinar titled Learning to Lead Learners Through Virtual Platform. I extend a hearty welcome to all on the second day of the webinar. Commencing the proceedings of the day, I, Tazeen Ahmed, take this opportunity to introduce our resource person, Dr. Paramjot Singh, on the second day session themed Protecting Human Rights in a COVID-19 Lockdown. Dr. Paramjot Singh is currently the chairman of the Center for Peace and Unity at XLRI Jamshedpur and convener of the SC/ST committee at XLRI. He also teaches business laws, constitution and labor laws applications, and conducts meetings and training during management development programs for various PSUs, government banking PSUs, private sectors, and ALCs and RLCs of Government of India. Dr. Paramjot Singh has been associated with human rights advocacy and awareness campaigns for the last 1 decade and has worked extensively on the legal issues concerning rehabilitation and resettlement of involuntarily displaced tribal people. On behalf of Loyola College of Education and the principal, Dr. Father P. Anthony Raj S.J., I welcome you, sir, to this webinar hosted by the IQAC of LCE and invite you, sir, to preside over the session to enrich us with your wisdom and knowledge. Over to Dr. Paramjot Singh. Sir, once again, welcome.
Thank you, Tanzeen. So you can hear my voice, all of you?
Yes, sir, very good voice.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope all the participants are just there and the technology does not come in the way of any disruptions between you and me. You and me is one, us is another. So we have to travel from you and me to us today. So it's going to be a little interesting and long journey, but will more or less, give us a chance of looking at ourselves, looking at human rights, looking at this whole discourse, why it is important, and why do we have to care about it? Why do we have to think about it, and why do we have to, ponder about it? Now, this is something which is not very new. It has a long history, and we will go into that. But one thing comes to my mind when we start, thinking about COVID. COVID brings to us a kind of fear, brings to us a kind of anxiety. It brings to us a kind of, you can say, anger. Anger at what? Anger at people whom we think are responsible for the pandemic, because so much is going on the internet. Well, it was lab made, it was human error, it was the failure of some governments. But tell whatever you want to tell, but end of the day, you are not very comfortable with the world around you. So that is how we start looking at COVID situation today. And we feel that the best way is to, just save ourselves from the pandemic by not going out, to save ourselves from the pandemic by getting locked in. So there is a national lockdown, well, this national lockdown is here. The national lockdown situations are in other parts of the world. Some started it early. Others realized it in realizing the gravity of the situation. They started a bit late, but then they all started. And then the reactions were very different. Well, the developed West was technologically, more prepared to at least confront the medical emergency that comes out of this kind of a situation. And people feared what will happen to poor nations, what will happen to the developing world, and what will happen to those who are at the base of, in terms of resources. What will happen to these countries? How are they going to manage the pandemic situation? So we felt some kind of helplessness. And, whenever you feel helpless, you look for answers. So that is the beginning. That is the beginning of the inquiry. So we are helpless. So we are seeking some answers. Where are we going to get these answers from? I'm putting this question to you. Where are we going to seek these answers from? Answers from whom? And we are talking about human rights. But why are human rights important? And how are these answers or this inquiry linked to this whole aspect of human?
Pramjot sir, your audio is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Okay, fine.
Yes, sir.
Well, now the question now is that in such a kind of a situation of a pandemic, how do we go forward from here? How do we go forward from here? How do we come to a situation where we can address these things properly? So we talk about the human rights. Now, this is not, as I said, this is not a short journey, this is a long journey. It's a long journey of finding hope, a long journey of finding strength, and a long journey of making ourselves more resilient to these kind of challenges. And I said in the beginning, and those who were a little late, let me for the benefit of those who came a little late, let me narrate it one more time, that when the pandemic started, we were angry. We were angry at everybody. We were angry at the governments. We were angry at those who did not handle it properly. We were angry at those who caused the pandemic to just spill over. And so we thought, what is this? Why are these governments so irresponsible? And they should be compensating us. But all these questions also occurred as an afterthought. The first thought was, let me save myself, my family. So you wanted to withdraw. This is the first thing that happens in a situation of pandemic, that you withdraw yourself. You withdraw yourself from the society, from social interactions. So the term came, social distancing. So we went away from each other into the confines of our homes. We stayed there. And we thought we will just wait for the governments to work out a plan of rescue. And then as and when that actually leads to some kind of a safe position, encouraging position, we'll just come out. And we thought that we are going to be at the receiving end because we, as a third world or a developing country or people with less resources, need to be more careful. Unlike the West, which has more resources, technologically advanced, but look what is happening. Today, everybody is helpless. What happened in Italy, what happened in the United Kingdom, what happened in the United States, with all the technology at our disposal. Look, how have we fared? COVID-19, the virus has brought us to our knees. We are all kneeling down before it. Big or small, powerful, weak, the moneyed people, the poor people, everybody. It spares nobody. It doesn't care which caste you belong to, which religion you belong to. It has come, it is going to run its course. It's going to affect you. What are you going to do? It's a helpless situation. And then we think about rights. Why do we think about rights? When you're withdrawing away from the society, when you're withdrawing from, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. Well, sometimes something goes up and down the screen, so I have
Yes,
to just
Yes.
keep thinking about it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So in such a situation, when you're withdrawing, when the institutional frameworks that we have are under great stress, your police is under great stress, your public utility services are under great stress. There's a lockdown situation. So you're angry. Nobody's allowing you to take to the streets to, buy provisions for your family, buy medicines for your family. And look, this is going to affect people differently. Some a little more fortunate in the cities, fare a little better, but not much. People in the villages are facing the lockdown. They are not able to come and travel long distances. And so it is affecting each one of us depending upon the degree of proximity that we have to resources and the control we have over them. Now comes human rights. Why do human rights are important? Well, human rights are then becoming important because if your rights as an individual are affected, who is going to guarantee them to you? Who is going to guarantee them to you? It is going to be the state. The state is responsible. And as we go into this long journey of how the state became liable to protect your rights, even during a pandemic situation, remember, it is the state. Your life and property is the responsibility of the state. But the state today is under great stress. How do you balance it out? Where do you look for hope? Is there a legal setup that will come to your rescue? Are the courts going to come to your rescue? How are you going to fare in such a difficult situation comes the question in mind. And then you have to seek answers because you have to become resilient, because you have to move forward. We cannot say technology is not supporting us, so we cannot do anything. We cannot say we are not able to go to our classes, we cannot do anything. We cannot say we are not able to talk to our teachers. We cannot say. We cannot say many things that we want to say. It's a difficult situation. So how do we cope with it? And how do we cope with these kind of situations in the future? So COVID is an alarm bell for each one of us. COVID is an alarm bell for each one of us. It tells us, hey, buck up. Make your acts good. Make your support systems good. Make your governance systems good. Now, if COVID says all this, how are you going to come into this? How are you going to confront this? And why human rights? And I said, human rights is at the center of protecting the human in us. So the first question comes to you, what are human rights? And those of you, I would just ask, request each one of you that if you have a pen and a paper or something to write, please jot down the legislations that I talk about so that you can have a good map at the end of the session and you can understand where we traveled, how far we have traveled on the journey of rights. So the first important thing is, what is human rights? the bare minimum that gives to every human the right to live with dignity, the bare minimum, without which it will be mere animal existence. That is the human right that we are seeking. And where do the human rights come from? You write human rights, and then where do the human rights come from? They come from something called natural rights. And when I say natural rights, what are natural rights? Natural rights are rights which we had when we were born. It was given to us by the nature around us. Nature gave us these rights because nature makes you in a way, and nature provides protection for that life to be lived. Now, in such a situation, if I say natural rights, what should come to your mind? The first word that should come to your mind is, do we have reason? Reason. Any process that we have, we should have reason. Second, we should have justice. And third, this reason and justice should be immutable. They should not be changed for people. What is true for Ramesh is true for John, must be true for Jaspal. So immutable, they should be inalienable. Nobody should take them back from you. And then they should be universal, means they should be applied everywhere. So what is true in India, as far as human rights are concerned, must be true in United States, must be true in United Kingdom. So universality is another aspect of human rights. And then comes a very important word, which a great jurist from England, his name was A.V. Dicey, he said, the rule of law. The rule of law is one thing which again brings us into this whole discourse that human rights are important. So rule of law is important, human rights are important, natural rights are important. So in a pandemic situation, how do they affect us? They affect us because if the governments, the state institutions are not able to protect your rights, then these rights get eroded or eroded. When they get eroded, then you have losing of rights. So the biggest challenge in the pandemic is when these rights will be taken away from you. You will feel very helpless, as if these rights are just not there for you. Now, in such a situation, the first important thing to know about human rights comes in the legal form. There are two different ways in which we understand human rights. And in these two different ways that we understand human rights, we see where are these rights guaranteed to us. Now, these rights are guaranteed to us internationally, and these rights are also guaranteed to us nationally. Nationally means within our own country. Where do we find human rights? Now, if you look into your own constitution, and in your own constitution, you will find that the constitution was brought into force in the year 1950, 26th of January. And that was the time when the constitution was brought into force, 1950, January 26th. Now, the first human rights instrument in the world, which was a declaration, was called UDHR, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Remember, I told you, when we are talking about rights, they must be universal. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came in. Now, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came in and the Constitution comes in 1950, there must be some relation in between, because ideas were flowing and these ideas got influenced. And so we started getting influence from each other. In such a situation, the first important document that is a reference point for us internationally is the UDHR, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And immediately they thought, well, it is just a declaration. You see, you make a declaration, people may listen to you, people may not listen to you. Now, the next step then was that, look, let us make this declaration into some kind of a binding force. And the binding force comes with the fact when you give your consent, so the consent was given by the member states, and this first declaration was brought in, the Declaration for Universal Declaration was brought in by the United Nations. The second was again at the United Nations level, and that was ICCPR, or International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And then they said, no, not just civil and political rights, but also economic and social and cultural rights are important. So that was also incorporated into the second covenant called International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And this was in the year 1966. UDHR was 1948. Your constitution was 1950. Now, the question now comes to your mind. Is there a relationship? Is our constitution also talking about rights as they were talked in these big documents? Yes, they were. In your constitution, there are two parts. The first part is called the fundamental rights part, from Article 12 to Article 35, guaranteeing the right to equality, to equal opportunity, to freedom of expression, freedom of free movement. And now the question will come, okay, if the constitution gives us free movement, why is this restriction by the state, even in a pandemic situation like COVID? I will explain to you. Restrictions can be there, but all restrictions by the state, please note, must be reasonable restrictions. If these restrictions are not reasonable, then these restrictions are bad. They are arbitrary. They take away our rights. We are not very happy when somebody takes away our right. Are we? No. So the freedoms. Then came the right to personal liberty, to life in Article 21 of your constitution. Then Article 28 said nobody should be forced neither to any labor. Nobody should be forced to any bonded situation. Article 24 of the constitution said no child should be put to any kind of employment that leads to hazardous involvement. No, you cannot do all these things. The constitution was speaking about this. Why? Because the constitution was in a way also incorporating the philosophy of human rights protection that was happening at the United Nations level. So something was happening at the international level and something was happening at your national level. Now, ICCPR 1966, as I said, the civil and political rights were all reflected in your fundamental rights from Article 12 to Article 35 of your constitution. Now the question will come to your mind, sir, what happened to the economic, social and cultural rights? Were they not incorporated? Yes, they were also incorporated, but they got incorporated in the second part of your constitution, which was called the Directive Principles of State Policy in Part 4 of the Constitution. Now the only difference between Part 3 of your constitution, fundamental rights, and Part 4 of your constitution, Directive Principles, is that Part 3, if they are violated, you can move against the state to restitute those rights for you. As far as Directive Principles of State Policy are concerned, they cannot be moved in any court of law. But look, your state does not stop at that. Your courts intervened and they said, no, you cannot just do this. This is just not the scheme. The scheme has to be made workable. And who is going to work it out? Now in India, the working out was done by the arbiter. Who is the arbiter? Who is the social arbiter? Now look, in the pandemic situation, when migrants are working in difficult situation, when the migrants are traveling with their families over thousands of kilometers, and everybody is feeling bad about them. When the migrants are in the lockdown, they're not able to come back to their families. Is there a derogation of their rights? Yes, there is a derogation of their human rights. The human rights to be united back with their families. The human rights of free movement. Now, government is putting restrictions. It's a pandemic situation. But you have to put restriction and that has to be reasonable. The question then is, are the restrictions reasonable? All restrictions which are not reasonable are called arbitrary. whimsical, fanciful. There is no place before the courts for these kind of regulations, even if they are done by the state. So the state has to ensure. Now, the state will only ensure if you are vigilant about your rights, isn't it? So your vigilance will come when? Your vigilance will come with the knowledge about these rights. Now, the knowledge about these rights, as I said, there was a situation when we had ICCPR, then you had your own constitution, which is taking charge of this. And I said, your constitution has into two parts. One is the fundamental rights. And if the fundamental rights are violated, if somebody takes away your life and liberty or takes away your free movement, then you can go to the court. So now people are going to the court. So who is the arbiter? Then the arbiter is the court. The arbiter is the court. Now you have known that not only the courts, but the government, though it is interested, the executive wing is interested to protect your rights. And who interests? It is the constitution which entrusts that rights to the executive wing. Now people go to the courts. Why? Why do they not go to the executive? This question will also occur to you. Why do they go to the courts? And then why do they go to the Supreme Court? Remember, whenever there is a fundamental rights violation, which are basically part of your human rights, you go to the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution of India. And is the restitution of rights only done by the Supreme Court? No, it is also done by the high courts. And I'll tell you one important thing, that the high courts, when you go to the high courts is closer home. Now, which high court is the closest to us? Just a sec. Which high court is the closest to us? The Ranchi High Court, the High Court at Ranchi. Now, the High Court at Ranchi is closest to us. Now, we go to the High Court at Ranchi under the writ jurisdiction. Please write writ, W-R-I-T, writ jurisdiction. Now, writ jurisdiction is when any of your fundamental rights are violated by the state or an instrumentality or the agency of the state or any wing of the government, then you go against the state. You go directly to Supreme Court under Article 32. But if you want to check it closer home, you go to the High Court. It's always better to go to the High Court, closer home. And the remedy available under Article 226 is a little wide. It takes care of your fundamental rights as well as your other legal rights. So that is how these rights were being protected. So now, as of now, what do we understand? We understand that there's international conventions, there are international covenants which we have signed. And since we have signed as a state party, it is our duty to follow them. But then, do we also structure our laws according to what we agree at the international level? So let me give you a few examples. I said, apart from UDHR, ICCPR and ICESR, the year is 1966. After that, there was a refugee convention. There was a convention on the rights of women called CEDAW. C for Calcutta, CEDAW. What does this mean? It was a convention on the rights. It was a convention for elimination of all kinds of discrimination against women. 1979. Where do we sign it? We signed it in Beijing. It was called the Beijing Convention. Similarly, there was a convention on the rights of the child, and the year was 1989. Now, in this particular convention, the Convention on the Woman and the Convention on the Child, what did they talk about? They talk about the human rights of the women and human rights of the children. Now, the rights of men and women are taken together in the previous conventions and declarations. But these are specific ones. Why do we have specific instruments at the international level? Because even after we had this, nothing was happening. So they thought, okay, let us make specific efforts. So the Beijing rules, that is CEDAW, to eliminate all kinds of discrimination against women was brought in. Similarly, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In the year, on the woman it was 79, and remember, for the children it was in the year 1989. Convention on the Rights of the Children. Now what happened? We went there, we saw these conventions, we signed it. Now the duty was we had to protect them. That was agreed at the international level. And we came back, we looked into our constitution. Our constitution has a provision which says, if you go out, sign a convention, sign a treaty, you have to come back, and then you have to style your laws according to what you have agreed at the international level. Now, did we do that? Now, the question was, for the first time, the law to protect the children in India came much later. Similarly, the law, I'm not talking about the policy, the law to protect the rights of the woman came much later. You see, one of the most important part was the right for the children, which was part of the act which prevented them from all kinds of exploitation, including sexual exploitation. And that was called POCSO, Prevention of All Kinds of Offenses Against Children. And that was in the year 2013. In the same year, Prevention of Harassment, and that was sexual harassment of women at workplace, was brought in 2013 again. And then we had the institutional frameworks. Now the question then is, if these things were there, then did the rights as mentioned in these statutes and conventions were truly becoming a reality? I leave this question open to all of you. Ponder about it. It did happen that in some cases we did make some headway, but long way to go. And who was the arbiter here again? The courts. The courts came in. And what did the courts do for you? For protecting your rights. Remember, the courts in India, we must always, keep our hats off for the Supreme Court of India. You know why? Because they changed their rules. They did everything to bring the human in us to be recognized in the processes of court, so that justice becomes a reality. Without justice being seen as done, justice talked as done is of no use. So then what did the court do? The court brought in the change in the rule. Let me tell you, there was a time, and the time was from the day we had our constitution to 1982, that if somebody is affected, only he can go before the court. It was called the concept of locus standi, L-O-C-U-S standi, S-T-A-N-D-I, which means if you are affected by the cause, you can come before the court. I cannot go for you. I cannot go for the person on the street. Only he can go. Now tell me, friends, is everybody in a position to go to the courts? Is everybody in a position to afford the high fees? Is everybody able to travel out in a country where 2 square meals a day sometimes becomes a big challenge? Justice then was a long rope, but the Supreme Court changed its rule in the year 1982. It led to public interest litigation. One example was a small, case which came from Bihar. A lady, it was also a kind of a lockdown kind of a thing, but it was a different kind of a lockdown, not like pandemic lockdown now. Well, she was in a jail in Bihar. Her name was Hussain Ara Khatun, old lady. And she was in the jail, and the year was 1979. And nobody was listening to her. She was very poor. And she was in the jail. She was denied bail many times. So one day, with tears in her eyes, she talked to the jailer and she said, "Nobody listens to me. I'm a poor woman. And there is no justice in this world. When will I go out from this prison? I'm not sure about it. The jailer jokingly said, "Oh, if nobody is listening to you here, why don't you write a letter to the Supreme Court judges?" And do you know what the poor woman did? She believed. She believed the joke. But look, the joke would bring justice to millions of people later on. So what she did? She went back. She ordered for a postcard. She wrote her difficulty, what she was going through, and she posted it to the Chief Justice of India, New Delhi. The postcard reached Justice P.N. Bhagwati, the great doyen of human rights. He was the judge. He looked into that. He said, can we wait for the processes? The processes of law courts can sometimes keep human rights away and consequently justice away. Can we just do that? Or should we look forward? And he said, we must look forward. And when he said that we must look forward, he brought in, when he said we must look forward, he brought in a new thing called, I am taking this letter and treating it as a writ petition. And the moment he did that, from that day onwards till today, there is this concept of letters petition. And dear friends, if any of your fundamental rights are violated and you feel that somebody is responsible, some agency of the state or somebody is responsible who should have protected but has not protected, write a letter to the Chief Justice of India and his brother judges, and they will look into your letters. A poor woman in one corner, had she left all hope, things would have just gone. She would have just languished in the jail. But she made a difference. That difference has brought justice to millions of others who wrote letters to the Supreme Court judges. So the entire aspect of public interest litigation was ushered in and things developed. And remember, in such a kind of a situation, came in for the first time a specific legislation to guard your human rights. This legislation was called the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. Remember this. This was a special protection. You are talking about human rights, and human rights are mentioned in the Constitution. And if they are violated by a state agency or an instrumentality or any authority under the state, what should be the mechanism? How are they going to be restituted? So they said, we must have a mechanism. You are talking about rights, but there has to be a structure. So they brought in the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. After the act was brought, the act established the National Human Rights Commission at Delhi, and every state had a state human rights commission. Now, if your human rights are affected, you can write directly to the State Human Rights Commission. Now, the State Human Rights Commission of Jharkhand is located in Ranchi. You see, similarly, there are other commissions which are also there to protect your human rights or legal rights. The Women's Commission, the ST Commission, the SC Commission, the Commission for the Protection of the Children, they're all there. But the most important for us to remember here that whenever there is a human rights violation, which you see around you, you can directly write a letter to the State Human Rights Commission. You can represent your case or the case of others. This all began with the Human Rights Act. Now, apart from this, let me just put you across two other important aspects. And that is that apart from the statutory protections that we have, we must take this a little forward by making ourselves also part of the process. How can you do that? Now, you can say that in a pandemic situation, is it possible for me? Yes, it is possible for you. Now, remember, during the pandemic situation, my other speaker, who will join us in few minutes time. She has worked very well on the gender issues. She has a very open mind with regards to understanding genders, and she will talk about domestic violence act. She'll talk about women, she'll talk about children. So I'm keeping that part out. But my important query to myself and to everybody around me is, we had signed a declaration, an international convention on the protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of the families. Not only migrant workers, we had signed it. The international convention was in the year 1990. We had also signed it. We also signed another guidelines on the principles governing internal displacees. People who are displaced. Let me tell you, people who are internally displaced or are called forced displacement can be occurring into different situations and out of different situations. Sometimes they can be displaced involuntarily. Sometimes they can be displaced voluntarily. But they have their rights. Whenever they are involuntarily displaced or voluntarily displaced, they must be compensated. They must be taken care of. Are we doing that? We have to ask ourselves this important question. And the other important thing during the COVID lockdown is, what is happening to our schools? What is happening to our children? Now, when I say what is happening to our schools, what is happening to our children, what is happening to our colleges, we are all going online. You see, the mode of instruction needs to be enhanced because there are issues with technology. Say, for example, I had brought a PPT today. I wanted to share the PPT, but I know that because of the bandwidth problem, sometimes sharing the PPT may cause greater disruptions. So we have to work on the technology. Now remember, this is happening to people like you and me. What will happen to a student who is in a remote village and there is some instruction given that the classes will be held online? Do you think they have the wherewithals, the capacity to generally learn through technology? Do they have good connectivity? First of all, equipment. Do they have the equipment? Then the connectivity. Then were the capacities built for the children to understand, to learn? Were the teachers trained in the use of technology? And even if we do all this, till we make it affordable, there's no meaning of the rights of the child. There's no meaning of the rights of dissemination of instruction, the right to education, which is a fundamental right today under Article 21A. You cannot deny anybody the right to education. It is the duty of the state, private, public, till 14 years. It's the duty of the state. But then, are we not facing challenges here? So what is the way out? How do we go from here? The most important thing is we must, in a way, be able to understand this and see whether we can create templates of understanding. And I tell you, I just ask you to read few acts. The first act that I want you to read is the Civil Rights Act. Constitution, I mentioned the provisions in the Constitution, that though you will read, I know, but the Civil Rights Act. Constitution, you have to read two parts. Part 3, Fundamental Rights. Part 4, Directive Principles of State Policy. Remember, Articles 36 to Article 51 are in the Directive Principles of State Policy. Though the articles in the DPSP section or Directive Principles of State Policy are non-justiciable, state must run the governance according to DPSP. And there are many things. To give equal pay for equal work. There should be gender equality. Children should be protected. Women should be protected. Workers should be protected. Legal aid must be given. Social security must be extended. Material resources should be distributed in such a manner that disparities are not created. These are all parts of the directive principles of the state policy. And it is the duty of the state to run the governance of the country. So DPSP reading is important. Apart from that, I would give you some statutes which you must read. The first one, the 1955, here is 1955, the Civil Rights Act, Protection of Civil Rights Act. This is the first. It protects your civil rights, without which you are just a prisoner. So all your civil rights are talked about in the Protection of Civil Rights Act. From 1955, we move to, as I mentioned, the Protection of Human Rights, 1993. Then after that, you again move a little bit to the year 2005, when a Commission for the Protection of Child Rights Act was brought in. After 2005, you come to another legislation called the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, 2012. And then the Protection of Harassment, Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, 2013. Now, these are few acts. The list is not very exhaustive, but these few acts can make us understand the long travel, the long struggle that has undergone into the enthronement of these human rights, these human values. So that is the most important part, which we must understand. And remember that in India, if we have really reached this level of human rights sensitivity, it is because of our long tradition of the courts protecting us. And which court? The Supreme Court and the High Courts. Remember, the Supreme Court and the High Courts are courts of law. So anything goes wrong, even if the state does anything which is going beyond what is sanctioned by the Constitution, the courts will intervene. The courts are the watchdog of the Constitution. The courts are the watchdog of the human rights. And then the public interest litigation. Today, anything and everything has been discussed before the Supreme Court. Such is the scope of indulgence of the Supreme Court under Article 21. Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, the right to life and liberty, was considered to be the lawyer's paradise. Not to be handcuffed, not to be handcuffed when arrested, not to be kept in solitary confinement, right to clean air, right to clean environment, right to good health, right to be immediately attended when facing an accident, Permanent Katara case, right not to be kept in the confines of a solitary cell, Sunil Batra's case, right to be extended the dignity of good labor, the PUDR versus Union of India case or Asiad case, host of these cases. You go to Article 21 someday, read a little bit about Article 21 of your own constitution, and you will find what the courts have done. Now you can make your own journal. These are my rights. These are my institutions. This is how the rights get violated, and this is how I have to go for restitution of these rights, not just for myself, but also for my neighbors, also for my community, also for my state. So today, you have to empower yourself. Today, you have to bring yourself into the center of some action so that you are not, because the pandemic has taken you away from the society. You don't have to be scared of COVID-19. If at all you have to be scared that you're just cutting yourself. No, you have to come back with safety, come back with new tools. And then one of the best ways is to come back with some intervention strategies. How can you help your government? How can you help your institutions? Say, for example, the local municipalities. How can you become a voice of creating awareness? Whether it is about rights, whether it is about government instructions, how can you contribute to the society? You can contribute by making masks. You can contribute by distributing some food, some medicines. You can contribute by holding online classes. Nobody is stopping you. Try to talk to young students. Try to talk to those who are in need. You can do that. Nobody is stopping you. But you have to do that within the framework of what is offered to you in the large gamut of human rights that you have, so that you feel that now comes the real empowerment. Empowerment with personal indulgence, not out of any fear, but out of a proactive approach. So that is where we have to learn that COVID should not become our weakness. COVID should lead us to better strength. COVID should lead us to a position where we can share with others. I'm absolutely open to all of you. You have my email. Get back to me on these rights, because there are so many. They're so elaborate. There are hundreds of cases, and hundreds of cases, which gives you so much to learn. And that is where you guys can always come back, and we can continue with this journey of understanding rights, understanding our institution, and taking ourselves forward. I must also thank Father Tony for this great effort that he has made, and this should take us somewhere. It should not just be a webinar. End of the day, we learned something, we heard something, and you will say that sir came, he spoke about certain things, and then he was gone. And then we had a nice session, and some of us listened, some of us pondered, some of us just wondered. It should not
Sir,
end.
for interruption, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, sir, we are going a little bit
Okay,
out of
Chanda.
time, sir.
Yeah, so I'm just concluding.
Yes, sir.
Just give me 5 minutes to conclude. So,
Yes, sir.
so the most important thing right now is to address the rights of the children and the rights of the vulnerable, those who are weak. Rights of the children, rights of the women, rights of the indigenous people, rights of the migrant workers, rights of those who are physically disabled. So we have to think about all this. There are long documents that we have. There are institutional frameworks which are working for the strengthening of these rights. We have to learn more about them. Get back to me if you have any question with regards to these processes. And remember that we must bring out new ways of sharing this knowledge and strengthening community interfaces and individual interfaces. We should not be in a situation of fear that anybody who comes to us is a person who comes to us with some threat. No, you have to fear COVID-19 virus. You don't have to fear the person. Please don't fear the person. The person has the same human rights that you have. And I'm telling this to the law enforcement agencies, to the government institutional structures, to the courts, that remember, this COVID should not take us away from each other. It has brought us to think on many important aspects of life, how to move ahead. We should now bring out ways how we can again reconnect and start experiencing the new normal that we have. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here with me, listening to whatever little I knew about rights. My mail ID is with you. Get back to me. I'll be happy to share whatever little I have with myself. Thank you very much. Stay cheerful. Stay safe with your families. Start loving your neighbors and start having empathy to strangers who come across you. Every stranger that you see is not a COVID positive person. Have a positive attitude towards life. have a positive attitude towards life, and stay cheerful and happy. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Paramjot Singh, for your valuable, informative, and very sensitive session. We will cherish from these information which you have given to us. Now, moving on, I call upon Mr. Gyan Tirki, Chandragyan Tirki, to take forward the proceedings of the session. Over to Mr. Gyan Tirki.
Thank you, Tajin ma'am. And once again, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Paramjot sir for his very informative session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Both of you. Thank you so much.
Good morning to all. Respected Reverend Dr. Father P. Anthony Raj, the Principal, Loyola College of Education, Jamshedpur. Respected Dr. Shreya Chakravarthy, Professor, Xavier School of Management, Jamshedpur. Respected distinguished guests, my colleagues, and dear participants. Once again, good morning to all of you. I, Mr. Chandragyan Tirki, Assistant Professor, Loyola College of Education, Jamshedpur, take it as a proud moment to introduce Professor Shreya Chakravarthy to all the virtual participants. Professor Shreya Chakravarthy has been associated with Xavier School of Management, Jamshedpur for the past 2 years in organizational behavior area. And she has been teaching courses like organization structure, design and change, organization change and development, organization theory, group behavior in organizations, and human resource analytics. She has pursued her doctoral studies from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, specializing in human resource management. And her doctoral dissertation has won the Outstanding Doctoral Dissertation Award for the year 2017 in the area of human resource management. She has presented papers in international reputed conferences like Academy of Management Meeting 2018, European Group of Organizational Studies Colloquium 2016 and 19, British Academy of Management Conference in 2014. She did her graduation in electrical engineering post, which she had worked for 28 months in Tata Consultancy Service Limited in Kolkata as human resource executive, handling recruitment and selection of engineering graduates and experienced professionals. On behalf of Loyola College of Education and the participants, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Shreya Chakravarthy. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Professor Chandragyan, and thank you so much to Professor Father Anthony for giving this opportunity to share our understandings and share our experiences, what we have been, witnessing in this whole COVID-19 pandemic. So I guess Professor Paramjot has a little bit brushed through what CEDAW talked about, what Convention on Rights of Children has talked about. But before we move on to the rights perspective,
Shreyanshi, your audio is...
am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I would first of all, express my gratitude towards Father Anthony and Professor Chandragan for giving this opportunity to share, our experiences, share our knowledge about human rights specifically around this COVID-19 pandemic. But before we move on to understanding the rights and how do we design interventions or how do we create processes so that people have access to all facilities, we should first understand why as women or as children are we as a vulnerable group in this kind of a situation. So if we want to see that women and children for that matter have some kind of differential kind of an impact when it comes to pandemic like of situation, why is that differences arising in the first place? So if you begin with women in the first place, so it would be something for that matter that there is a lot of women are engaged in the informal economy in India. A lot of women, so almost 90% of the women who are actually working for paid labor are actually in the informal economy. And with this lockdown kind of a situation where the informal economy has to a certain extent come to a standard still, so their means of livelihood gets affected, their access to healthcare system, their access to so many other social services gets affected to a significant extent. So one of the reasons why women are getting impacted is because of the too much of dependence on the informal economy, and also that women as such may not always have similar access to information or different kind of communication methods or sources vis-a-vis when compared to men for that matter. So one of the studies saying that women tend to use 17% less of internet when compared to men in this country. So for that matter, we are not always having equitable access to information in our daily lives for that matter. And also, the very, very critical component is about the healthcare perspective, that we have a different kind of requirement from the healthcare systems. Of course, we have other health issues also, but then there would be sexual and reproductive healthcare requirements which are to be also taken care of when it comes to women in the organized economy or women in the country in that case. So what happens generally during epidemics, which has been also observed in other epidemic situations, is the moment when there is some kind of a epidemic or a pandemic situation arising, the budgetary requirements which are provided for sexual and reproductive healthcare systems are curtailed down, and hence you do not get access to all these services or provisions in that case. And we have seen so many newspaper articles wherein they are not getting access, like a woman is in labor but she's not getting access to any of the hospitals for that matter. Nobody is willing to treat them. So this kind of discrimination happens specifically in a pandemic situation. So this is one of the things which also makes us vulnerable. And of course, this is always that we may not be always the primary breadwinner in the family or in the society, and hence we have very, very limited resources to cope with the pandemic. Though we see that the mortality rate of women vis-a-vis men seems to be on the favorable scale towards women, but still we do not have that much of resources when we see vis-a-vis men in the society for that matter, and hence it makes women a little bit more vulnerable community inside the nation or inside the country. And if we go back to see again what happens with children, is that children again do not always have enough of information, and they are not even always in a process ability to process that information. That is what they make them a vulnerable group in the society. And then they are not always in a position to express their fears, express their feelings, because they are not in a the children from say age 2 to age 18, they are each and everybody is at a different spectrum of ability to comprehend their feelings, to comprehend their fears, and then express them articulately with parents or their teachers or their guardians in that case. And also, when they are not able to go to the schools, some kind of social development is getting restricted for them. Right? They are not able to meet their parents, they are not able to meet their friends, and that camaraderie which brings up in a school kind of a setup, or that social inclusion which is required for them beyond a life, beyond the family or the four walls, that development is not happening for the children in that case. So that makes again them a vulnerable group in the society. And what happens also within the four walls, parents are anxious, parents are also afraid, and hence those kinds of anxieties and frustrations might get vented out on the children in some situations. So these are some of the instances or some of the reasons why we see that women and children are a group of a vulnerable kind, specifically in the pandemic situation. Now, if we come to the rights for that matter, right? What is it? What kind of rights are important, and what are the problems which they are facing? So, as we understand that these were the reasons why they are getting impacted in a different manner. So probably we have to have different kind of interventions, different kind of processes, different kind of mechanisms to help these two group of people, right? The women and the children of the society on the nation. So if we talk about rights, of course, the freedom of liberty or dignified life, and freedom of movement, freedom of expression. So these are some of the rights which are common across, say, men and women in that case. But if we look into also the specific rights which are being provided, so one of the major problems which is happening is the instances of domestic violence has been increasing. So if I give you some statistics, like when France, when Spain, and when Britain actually went for a lockdown, the amount of calls which these people, helplines, which they were getting vis-a-vis to the last year, had shot up to a significant extent. For example, in France, the number of calls which they were getting because of domestic violence were 30% more than the last year, whereas something similar was also happening in Britain. So we need to see that what is happening on the Indian front. We understand that there would be a higher chances of domestic violence, domestic abuse happening inside the community, because people are getting restricted into their four walls, and probably they are aware of what their different protection mechanisms are. So this is one of the ways through which women are getting significantly impacted, of course. And of course, as I mentioned, the healthcare systems, right? So are they getting complete healthcare services? And also we need to understand, are these part of essential services or not? So when we are talking about domestic violence, so all these helplines, all these counselors, all the, there are protection officers, there are shelter homes, all these provisions are there under the Domestic Violence Act, right? So there is a person, there might be an informant who gives information regarding the domestic violence to the relevant authorities. It could be to the protection officers, it could be to the police stations. So that person is not having any kind of a liability. So the act actually provides that there is no liability to the informant. So we as responsible citizens should see that, or be much more perceptive enough of what is happening in our surroundings. Just because it's a pandemic situation, and probably we are much more inward looking in that case, that how do I secure my health? How do I secure my family's health? So we should also keep our eyes and ears open around what is happening around in the society, in the neighborhood. As Professor Praramjot mentioned, that we should love our neighbors for that matter. We should understand what is happening, what is happening inside the community. So for that matter, the Domestic Violence Act also, helps to give a chance that the informant is not having any kind of a liability. Then he can make a request to either the police station and to the protection officers who has been appointed in every, say district or block, for whatever that matter. So we as responsible citizens should be aware who is the protection officer inside our community or inside our thana or inside the block where we are residing in. And if we see something similar happening, we should either help the person who is being afflicted because of domestic violence and see whether there is any kind of counselors available around or not. So one thing which probably the state should ensure at this point of time is all these helpline services, psychological services, counseling services, protection officers, shelter homes for domestic violence victims should be considered as essential services. We cannot take a chance that people are already in a very frustrated, as Paramjot mentioned, that they're also afraid, they're also angry. In that kind of a situation, we cannot expect not to give all these services to the needy people, to the vulnerable group inside the society. So that is a part of the Domestic Violence Act, as resourceful neighbors, as resourceful citizens, that we should be looking out. And also, if it is happening with us, that is another problem, right? Sometimes we normalize this kind of behavior, that this is kind of a very drastic kind of a situation, so probably they are getting frustrated. So why we should not say yes to this kind of violence, right? What is this? Another term which is coming around is intimate terrorism. So we kind of rationalize, because the person is angry, because the person is frustrated, so he or she is probably venting it out. So if something is happening to us, it could be physical, it could be sexual, it could be emotional. It has different various forms. So anybody can go to the Domestic Violence Act 2005 and see how is domestic violence getting manifested in multiple ways, and we should not rationalize this kind of a behavior. And if we have seen the movie Thappad, wherein the lady gets just one tight slap, and there are so many people in the society except her father who is saying, right, it's okay, right? What is wrong with one tight slap, right? The problem was, it was not just one tight slap. It was saying that it is okay, it is normal. This is not normal, and this is also not normal in a pandemic situation. We need to help each other. We need to be careful. We need not cause any harm to our fellow human beings. This is something which we can take care on a regular basis. So that is one part. And of course, as I mentioned, we cannot afford to ignore the sexual and the reproductive healthcare accesses to the women folk inside the society. And also, we need to understand that 70% of our health service workers and social workers are women. So they are much more exposed to the virus. They are much more, trying their level best to cure all these people, to keep our surroundings clean. And hence we should be a little bit, probably much more empathetic towards their contributions towards the society. So there has been instances where nurses and doctors have been discriminated, right? They are not allowed in their buildings to come back and probably have a rest or something like that. They are being, accused of COVID spreaders. So these are some things which we should, as dutiful citizens and responsible citizens, should stay aware of, and also avoid, stop other people from doing that. It's not just restricting ourselves, but it is also not allowing the bystanders just be bystanders. We could be proactive bystanders. We could be helpful bystanders in that kind of a sense. So something which has happened in Odisha, right? If you are hurting any kind of a essential health worker, you might be imprisoned, kind of a thing, right? So you cannot, it's considered as a serious crime, and you might be imprisoned in some of the scenarios. So these are some things which we should be aware of and take care in a day-to-day kind of a living way. Now, if we come to the case of children, in that case, now I mentioned why are children very vulnerable group in this point of society. So as Professor Paramjot mentioned, that we have this right to education, and there are challenges with the delivery on online basis, as well as access to digital infrastructure. But then it is just one facet of the children getting impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. There are other situations where children are, they are not able to go to schools, and their social development is not happening. So could we as parents look into and consider, can we be different uh, actors for them to help in their overall well-being, emotional development, physical development, and say educational development, and so on and so forth. So because every child has the right to fulfill their own personality, realize their own talent. So as Professor Paranjot mentioned, that there is a convention on rights of children. So there is that children should not be exploited. They should not be exposed to different kind of sexual offenses. There are host of sexual offenses which he had mentioned, that POXO Act, which talks about different kind of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and these so many different forms of exploitation which could happen on children. Also the pornography kind of a content. So as children, there is 250 million children inside India who are in the school going stage. So probably 10% of these children have access to laptops, have access to phones, and all these electronic gadgets. And probably we are not able to, restrict their what they are watching on internet, whom they are corresponding with on the internet, and this could lead to different kind of content which is being thrown out to these kids, and probably this is harming the social development, the emotional development of these children. So in this situation, again, if we go back to the POXO Act, so anybody who is abetting in the process of pornography or circulating content or making content which is related to child pornography, again is again imprisoned for a significant amount of time. So we as parents, we as teachers should be cognizant of the fact that these are the rights of the children, and hence children should be protected because they are a vulnerable group in that sense. So that is one of the considerations with respect to children. And now there is this high likelihood that once the economy starts to open, there would be again a flow of people required for very economy in the informal economy, especially when compared to hazardous employment in that case. So because the economy has taken a huge setback with respect to because of the lockdown, so businesses would try to capitalize on getting more and more profits, and there would be a likelihood that children are being used in hazardous kind of industries, are getting very minimally paid, because the problem is people are in such a dire state that everybody would want to get any kind of work to sustain themselves, and hence the problem is probably the children would be the first resource pool to who can be hired easily and who can be hired very, very cheaply. So again, if we as knowledgeable citizens, if we as empathetic citizens would have to be on the lookout that these kind of things are not happening in our community, and it also not happening in our nation or society for that matter. So these are the different ways through which children are exploited. And now, what this important thing with respect to what can state do at this point of time. So one of the ways is that we need to understand that India is a welfare state, and to a certain extent, what he was mentioning, that there is the DPSP, Directive Principles of State Policy, which very clearly mentions that it should try to bring some kind of equality within the society. It could be economic equality, political equalities, and so social equality, so on and so forth. So as a welfare state, it is to a certain extent the responsibility of the state to ensure these income inequalities are reduced. And probably the government is looking forward way ahead to give these cash transfers and help out food subsidies and so on and so forth to help all these people to tide over this pandemic situation. But this should not be a one-time affair for that matter. It should be a longer time duration effort which has to carry on for decades and centuries ahead, so that this income inequalities and access to healthcare systems has to be moderated. It cannot be that the rich always has access to all kind of resources and the poorer are getting poor and probably perishing on a much faster rate for that matter. So it should be to the state's responsibility to eliminate status, inequalities in status, facilities, opportunities amongst people residing in different regions and who have different vocations for that matter. So these are some things. And finally, I would like to emphasize that what we were talking is all about, rights of individuals, rights of human beings, rights as in this um, Indians for that matter. But then the Constitution also talks about our duties as citizens towards India. So we should be always, at least if not always, try to engage ourselves in some kind of nation building activity, something which is towards helping the nation to either tide over the situation of this pandemic, or to help our fellow beings, or to help our fellow citizens. In that case, we should try to live in harmony and have a good brotherlyhood situation inside our communities. We cannot keep discriminating people on the basis of whether the person is a COVID-19 positive or a COVID-19 negative, whether the person is an essential health worker or whether the person is a normal person who is working in any other kind of an industry. So there should not be any discrimination with respect to these identities. We had identities like sex, religion, caste, physical disability. Now the new thing which is occurring, in the new normal is a COVID-19 positive status. So we should be, to a certain extent, ignore the presence of virus inside the body. What we all keep listening, we should not hate the COVID-19 carrier. We should hate the disease for that matter. And that is why we have to work in harmony towards the betterment of our communities, towards the betterment of our society for that matter. And we cannot engage in any kind of activities which is derogatory to the dignity of women and follow a scientific temper, right? Whenever we are getting all these WhatsApp messages and articles, probably we should also think and reflect whether these are all verifiable, whether these kind of messages which are floating around or the articles which are floating around have been verified by experts or not. Has it been observed in other situations or not? So that is where, rather than what happened in the Bombay Bandra station, is suddenly somebody said that the trains are moving and everybody started, there was huge crowds of people who went into the Bandra station and crowded and probably created a more distressing situation for the state as well as the people who are living in that area. So this is for us to reflect what kind of information is credible and what kind of information is not credible. Yeah, a scientific temper has to be followed in each and every of our activities and our thought processes. And another aspect is also regarding safeguarding public property and staying away from violence. This is not the time when we move into riots, right? As Professor Paramjit also mentioned, if we think our human rights are getting affected, probably it is important for us to go to the courts, go to the Human Rights Commission and figure out what are the resolve, what is the recourses which are available to whatever, if our human rights are getting not violated to a certain extent. We cannot, take up instruments like what happened in Indore or, in some of the cities wherein the healthcare workers or the police people were coming and people were hitting back with those kind of instruments and scaring these people out. So we are not going to resort to violence. We have to be understanding what the country is going through, what are sorry. So what I was saying is that we cannot resort to violence and we should be ensuring that the public property is not getting impacted by any of these specific reasons. So as human beings, as women, as children, one should recognize that there are vulnerabilities and what are the how these vulnerabilities are tackled by the different laws for that matter. For example, for women, there is a Domestic Violence Act, especially the Maternity Benefit Act, childcare facilities. So whoever is a part of the formal economy has to be, also clearly that the maternity benefits are not being taken away from you. Or for that matter, if anybody is in the casual or contractual labor situation, then also the maternity benefits cannot be taken away from you. So we as responsible citizens should be cognizant of our own rights. So for women, it is awareness regarding what is happening within the four walls within the home, and understanding what is domestic violence, and also helping other females in their community, in their society, to not go through that kind of situation, helping them with counseling, and you know uh, awareness of who the protection officers are. And as Professor Paramjit also mentioned, right, probably we have to be much more voiceful regarding what are the different legislative mechanisms through which we can increase or get informed of our duties, or get informed of our rights. For that matter, who is the child protection officer in our district, or who is the child welfare officer in our district or in our block, and what are the different helplines which are available for the children as well as for the women, and who are the counselors in the neighboring community, so that even and this kind of communication should be happening in different forms, in different techniques, in different languages, so that it is available for each and everybody has the access to these kind of information, so that if any incident of this likelihood is happening, things can be taken care of. So as I mentioned, there are specific duties of Indian citizens, not only rights, but we should be also focusing towards our duties and responsibilities towards our community, towards our state, and see how we all can together tide over this epidemic and probably create a stronger nation at the end of this pandemic, and a much more healthier nation for that matter, who is much more respectful of what women are going through in this specific situation, and how our children can be protected, how our children could be developed further, so that they are much more responsible citizens and much more empathetic citizens in the long run. So this is where I would like to say that, of course, the stay home, stay safe still continues, but also being aware of our surroundings, awareness of our surroundings also very critical, and helping our citizens in the days of their need. We cannot shun them away, we cannot discriminate them. And if we see somebody's human rights are being taken away, we cannot be silent bystanders. We have to voice it out, and we have to be aware that whether our rights, if they are being taken care of, what are the legal recourses we could avail of, so that every individual enjoys their rights, right? Enjoy to freedom of mobility, freedom of expression, freedom of a good dignity of human dignity is available to each and every citizen in this country. Yeah, so we would be open for questions at this point of time, I guess, because last 10-15 minutes are still left.
Yes, ma'am, you have another 5 minutes. Your presentation, if you wish.
I think we can take the questions.
Continue with the question answer session.
Yeah, sure.
Gyan sir,
Yes.
I want to ask questions to Dr. Paramjot Singh, and these questions are from the participants. The first question is from Reverend Father Anthony Joseph, and he has, after reading his questions, I have divided the questions into 3 parts. First of all, the first question he is directed to Paramjot Singh is, what is the disaster action plan of these human rights tribunal while acknowledging what is the disaster action plan of these human rights tribunal in face of the High Court, in face of the Supreme Court dismissing the plights of millions of faceless and voiceless migrants, as well as the one of the judges who was retired SC judge, who was stopped from voicing his from airing his voice. So, what is the role and the role of Supreme Court while tackling these issues? The second question Dr. Father Anthony Joseph has put up is, how can we repair what we have not built? And what we have not built, he has written very categorically, we have not built the simple, ordinary, sensitive, responsible behavior of individuals. And then we go for the recourse to courts. So how can we safeguard our human rights in these conditions? Dr. Vikramjit Paramjot Singh, the question is directed to you, sir. Do we have Dr. Paramjot Singh?
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thanks, Father Anthony, for raising this very important question. The first one being with regards to the disaster action plan, the reaction of the courts. The most important thing here would be that the courts are very alive to the concerns, and yet the courts are also under a kind of stress with regards to the balancing of rights of different stakeholders in terms of the balancing of their individual and collective rights. Now, on the one hand, when the courts bring out judgment which in a way seems to be a little apathetic towards the major concerns of the migrants, it gives us a sense of, brings us into a sense of despondency with regards to such attitude of the courts. But then the court in the present situation also brings out, in consequence to the group which presented a petition to the Supreme Court, that when the government made a direction, and it was the direction given by the Ministry of Home Affairs, that in the pandemic situation, you have to keep paying the workers. Now, it is fine with companies or in establishments, those who do not have cash problem, who do not have cash reserve problems, but then they should also be compensated by the state. Now, in a situation where they are not compensated by the state and they are asked to pay, they would eventually get into bad debts, and then they would have to go to force lockdown of their industrial unit, which would in consequence be taking away the rights of the laborers or the workmen working therein. So that was one part which the court said, and the court gave the notice to the central government. The court first said that the order that you passed should have to be taken back. So the order was taken back. The second thing the court said was, you reply to, how are you going to compensate these units during this lockdown period? On the one hand, when the disaster action plan, which the central government brought in, and they said that, okay, we are putting some 20 lakh crores, how are they going to work it out? I think the court has asked a couple of questions, and the government is yet to file replies on that. That was one part. The other important part which Father Anthony brought out was, do we really respect each other? Have we brought in this tendency, the inner transformation? Where are we lacking in that? Well, it's a difficult question to answer. I do not have an answer to that, because it entails so much to be done. uh, Father Anthony has actually hit the bullseye. It is time for all of us to think. If you're talking about human rights, how are you going to talk about human rights in the school curriculum? They say catch them young. Sensitivities have to be developed. But if you are not teaching them being sensitive towards the other being, and that would mean, on the one hand, we are talking that there should not be any discrimination on the basis of caste, color, creed, political orientation, affiliation of any kind, any other status. And on the other, in the same class, you have students who behave differently with each other. Now, are we not intervening properly? Are we not teaching them properly? What to do? Well, we had a solution for this, and I may share with Father Anthony this effort. And this effort was also by a group of schools, and they had a workshop called Human Rights Education for School Children. Now, when they said human rights education for school children, how does human rights get into the curriculum of science? How does human rights get into the curriculum of social science? How does human rights get into the curriculum of physical sciences? Now, you think about it. They said you think about it. And I must share with you, people came out with very creative ideas. So there were deliberations. There were 2 days of national workshop in Bangalore. They deliberated and they brought out a policy document on that. But they said, this document we are sharing with our teachers who are our resources, and then we'll again take the feedback and see how we can move ahead on this. Now, moving ahead on this would mean that deep inside we have to come to terms with a development of a new curriculum, so that at the primary level, at the secondary level, if you take care of sensitivities or developing an attitude of sensitiveness towards the environment, then probably this man or woman will be much more sensible in terms of respecting the other. We are talking about tolerance. Remember, we talked about justice, liberty, equality, but there is another important thing in the preamble, and probably that requires us to be more open and accommodating, and that is fraternity. Have we really got into fraternity? Have we really started loving each other? And Father Anthony brings out that this tendency to love the other. If you love the other, who is the other? The other can be belonging to a different religion, to a different political orientation, to a different department of the government. The other can be a law enforcement officer. The other can be your neighbor. The other can be your neighbor's neighbor. The other can be anybody who's not you, but you treat him with sensitiveness. That will only happen if we start knowing these rights and we start talking about these rights. Not just talking. Let's start playing with these rights. Let's start a new song, the song of human rights. You know, I know I'm hoping too much to change, but we can do that. You guys have changed so much during the pandemic. You know, people have the environment has become clean, and there are less accidents. Your rivers have become clean. Well, birds have come back. Well, cats and dogs are not scared of you anymore. They just roam around in the street. Sometimes they look at you and ponder, what has happened? These guys are not coming out. So much has happened. And during this time, you had enough reflection. Somebody told me one important thing. And Father, with that, I will just end in this part. He said, you see, man was into a haste. All this technology, they were stockpiling nuclear weapons of mass destruction. They're stockpiling biological weapons. Today is the time to think, to go back to the human in us. Don't have a situation when you would be reaching a point of no return. All your technology is gone. You're just not prepared. A small little virus is laughing at you, is laughing at your technological development worldwide. So let's come back to our own human values. Start talking about them, playing with them, singing with them, interacting. And that is where Father Anthony's dream of becoming sensitive will begin. It has to begin with the rights. So let us take rights to the people. It came from them. It has to now again go back to them. And probably if that happens, sooner the better. Sooner the better. The pandemic has taught us many things. I think we have to learn our lessons a bit more quickly.
Dr. Paramjot Singh, another question from Dr. Father Anthony was, what are your views, without attempting to unravel and tread into messy parts of political stagecraft, about what are your views about the lockdown along with demonetization, which are reeks of human right violation? He has specifically asked not to unravel the parts of political stagecraft, and then express your views on that.
One is you said on demonetization. The other one was
Lockdown.
okay. Okay. As far as the present lockdown is concerned, the restrictions that we have, if we go into all the international covenants that we have signed and where India is a state party, it has ratified them. And if we look into the Constitution of India, which is the grand norm under which all other statutes and all other laws. And remember one thing, let me make it clear. When I say law, the term law does not only mean statutes or acts. It means an order of the government, a circular of the government, of any department, a bylaw, any rule, any regulation, any custom or usage that has gained the force of law in the territory of India. This is law. Now you will ask me, where is this definition given? The definition is given in Article 13, Clause 2. Now, having said that, when a pandemic takes place, the government makes regulations. Is the government in a position to make these regulations, rules? Where does they get the power from? Of course, they get the power from the Constitution. Now, Article 19 says about expressions. So I can express anything I want freely. If doing so, I'm not hurting anybody's sentiments. I'm not going against the morals and ethics. I'm not going against disrupting the law and order of the state. I'm not going against the unity and integrity of the state. If I'm doing so, I can express anything I want. Now, can the government then also put some kind of a restriction on this? They can, only to the extent that such restrictions are reasonable in nature. Please remember, I'm speaking purely from the point of view of the Constitution. Whatever restrictions that we see, or whatever restrictions that we make, that would be reasonable restriction. If they are reasonable restrictions, they will get the sanction of the Constitution. Now, in the pandemic lockdown, is the state in a position to make the restrictions? Yes, they are. But the state must, and here is the caveat, the state must ensure that the restrictions are reasonable. They are not arbitrary. They are not fanciful. They should not come out of any malified intention. They should not segregate Remember, the state has another duty also. The state has the duty to uphold the constitution. And when I say the state has the duty to uphold the constitution, it is not only the constitution in terms of what is stated, but the rules, the regulations, the procedures that you make must also be fair, just and reasonable. Means laws should be fair, just and reasonable, as well as the procedures must be fair, just and reasonable. Sometimes what happens, there is a good law and a bad procedure. The law is, okay, you can put restrictions on the movement, but the bad procedure is you are segregating on the basis of people's economic status or their caste or their religious status. That is not allowed. Now remember this, what is allowed is the reasonable part. Now many a times people would ask me, what is the reasonable part? What is reasonable restriction? Remember, reasonable restriction is that which is directly linked, means a particular rule or a particular act is linked to the object for which it is made. If the link, the jural link, the legal connection is made clearly and transparently, then it is reasonable, reason-based, clear, as opposed to something which is pervasive, as something which is of one's own making. No, that is not required. What is required is it must have a direct connection to the object for which it is made. Then we are supposed to say that, okay, it has the backing of reason. 1. 2, it must be according to the constitution under which such rules are made, such acts are made. So it must be consistent with your constitution. Remember, any act of the government which is not consistent with the constitution, as per Article 13, will be ultra vires, will be null and void. Will be ultra vires, will be null and void the constitution. So that means that is the added responsibility of the state. Now, the state can make classification according to Article 14, but remember, again, there also the constitution gives the provision to be worked in a given format, and the format is such classification should not be class based. Means you cannot segregate on the basis of the differences of class, but categories can be created where people are different from each other in terms of their capacities. For example, Article 14 talks about equality before law, means everybody is equal before law. But there is another part of Article 14 which says equal protection of laws. Now remember, we are more fortunate than our tribal brothers who are living in the villages. And within the villages, there are some who are more fortunate than the other. Now, if you are making a rule, you should always remember the last man on the street, the weak man on the street, the deprived man on the street, the vulnerable on the street, the marginalized on the street, one who is at the powerless periphery, who's living at the powerless periphery. There are people who are in the core, there are people who are at the periphery. You have to look into that. That is the role of the state. And the constitution has very clearly mentioned how to reach this goal. The constitution has made it very clear. There is an agenda for us to achieve. The constitution has a mandate to achieve, and you must achieve that. This is one part. On demonetization, the government, the state must also see that people who are differently placed should not be adversely affected. But we have seen that people did face adverse situations and the information was not properly disseminated. People's economic and social life got disrupted. The state should ensure that. Remember, whenever the state is not able to ensure this, and that leads to any of the rights mentioned from Article 12 to Article 35 in the fundamental rights sphere, such citizens can go against the state for the restitution of their rights. They can do it before the High Court, they can do it directly in front of the Supreme Court. But the state must be reasonable. The state must be reasonable. And that is the dictate of the Constitution. That is the agenda of the international conventions. And that is how the Supreme Court and the High Courts or the courts of law have decided questions.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are many more and so many thank you wishes and appreciation in the chat box for both of you.
Thank you.
And even Dr. Father P. Anthony Raj has expressed his heartfelt thanks in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you so much.
For the powerful and convincing discourse on legal perspective on our theme.
Thank you.
We are running short of time. One more question to Shreyanshi Chakravarthy ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Few questions are asked in YouTube platform. This is from Lipika Das.
Okay.
As the domestic violence rate is increasing during this pandemic time, so as future teacher, how can we help the sufferers and make them aware of the women rights? Similar question is there from Atul Kumar Devedi. How can we manage and control domestic violence during this pandemic situation?
Okay. I would respond to both these questions. Like, first of all, understanding what is domestic violence, the definition of domestic violence, which is very clearly mentioned in the Act also, as I was mentioning. It is not only, physical in nature. It could be emotional. It could be, sexual in nature. And of course, the physical part of it in that case. So understanding what is domestic violence, and probably, if you... once you know what is it, and understanding the causes, is it probably at times it happens that people rationalize that probably I'm doing something wrong and that is why the violence is being inflicted on me. And another part of it is it's not just between a husband and a wife for that matter, or a two partners in that case. It could be within in a domestic relationship, a son beating up his mother, or for that matter, a brother beating up his sister. And there are so many other instances of domestic violence. It's just not limited to, for that matter, husband and wife in that case scenario. So understanding the whole gamut of what domestic violence entails of, once you know that, you have to, probably as teachers, understand the counseling part of it. Not everybody is a certified counselor. Not everybody is a certified psychologist in that case. So probably, if we are not able to help the person in counseling, at least we give that empathetic ear to that person, right? Whoever that person is going through. And, not for that matter, as I mentioned, the movie Thappad, it says that apart from listening, we have to say that probably, what you are doing, we are not supposed to judge them in that case. We are not supposed to judge the actions of the perpetrator or judge the actions of the victim in that case. We do not have to validate, the existence of that crime. We have to understand, explain the person that you are a human being and you have certain rights, and you can go out to a different shelter home, you can go out to the protection officer, you can go out to the magistrate in that case. So here, this law actually also provides that you can get access to free legal aid. The Act itself provides you that, legal service authorities, which you can access without any kind of, investment from your end. People do not go to courts, or people do not go to police stations because of the fear of stigma, because of the fear of retribution, and also because of the fear of having so much, because you're already getting victimized. Where do you get the resources to handle such a long kind of a battle which happens in the court with respect to any kind of a civil nuisance, or for that matter criminal nuisance? So hence we have to make them aware. As counselors or as teachers, we have to tell them, no, it is free. You can go to the courts, you can voice your ailment, you can voice your abuses, whatever is happening with you, with whatever the situation is, and report it to the concerned authorities. Even if the victim is not ready to that, you, because you are a teacher, you can take the position of an informant and seek out, probably go to this police station, probably see who is the protection officer in your area, and inform this kind of incident has happened, or this kind of incident is likely to happen in that kind of scenario. And hence you can help all these victims of domestic violence to a significant extent. First of all, giving that empathetic ear to them, and do not validate whatever is happening with them is right or wrong. You are not to take that judgment call. It is the state's responsibilities, the court's responsibility to figure out what has happened, why it has happened, and whether it should be prevented, and how it can be prevented in the future in that case. And providing them access to the shelter homes, providing them access to the protection officers, providing to them access to the legal aid services in that case. So probably if you see in your police station that there is no female officer, you have to go to your local municipal authorities and voice out that there should be a female officer who is there to take up all these complaints, who is giving that kind of a space and safe environment, and a conducive environment where people can, where women can, where children can go and speak out their abuses of, domestic violence, or whatever is that situation, exploitation which is happening inside the four walls of the home for that matter. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Gyan sir, I have one more question for Dr. Paramjot Singh. I think this should be the last one. The question for you is, does justice prevail in our country in spite of having Human Rights Act? It is from Christina. The question is from Christina. Does justice prevail in our country in spite of having Human Rights Act? Sir, unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much, Christina, for raising this. Does justice prevail? Does justice prevail? Does justice prevail? Yes, it does. It does prevail, but you have to run through the whole process. Sometimes the going can get tough. Sometimes the going can get tough. The reason is, as I said, people are at different levels. There are people on the top, the people in the middle, the people in the base of the pyramid. Not everybody is equally in a position to enjoy the fruits of the Constitution, enjoy the fruits of the courts. Justice access system then must be garnered to address to the aspirations of the people at the lowest level. Has that happened? Has the state does anything to achieve this? It has started doing it, but it's a long journey. Remember, it is the courts, it is the honorable courts that has always accommodated the rights claims. And the courts, the Supreme Court of India, that has stood the test of time and is still, despite the criticisms are always there. It's healthy to have criticisms, but despite the criticism, they are still voices of justice, which glorify the long tradition, which began with cases like ADM Jabalpur versus Sivakant Sukla that celebrated case, Christina, in the year 1976, when a person was detained because there was proclamation of emergency. And the case went to the Supreme Court, ADM Jabalpur versus Sivkant Sukla. And in that case, the Honorable Justices then, Justice P.N. Bhagwati, Justice Beg, Justice A.N. Rai, Justice Chandrachud, not this Chandrachud, he is the son of that great Justice Chandrachud. All these four justices, they sided with the argument of the state that during a proclamation of emergency, your fundamental rights can be suspended. The right under Article 21 can be suspended. But do you know, there was one judge who said no. No. And he wrote the dissent. He wrote the dissenting judgment. He said no. Even during the proclamation of emergency, the fundamental right to representation cannot be taken away. Article 21 is the right which moves from cradle to grave, cannot be taken away. And he said this, and he lost his promotion, but he stood for justice. The great Justice Hans Raj Khanna. If you ever get time, just Google Hans Raj Khanna and ADM Jabalpur. You will know what your justices have done. And the justices who sided with the government during that time, I don't say sided with the government, who accepted the argument of the government council. They said, Justice P.N. Bhagwati, 8 years. The only judgment in my life, if I want to rewrite, it would be ADM Jabalpur. The great doyen of human rights, later on to become the great doyen of human rights. He went to the International Court of Justice as well. He said, and Justice Chandrachud's son said, my father often regretted writing the judgment. But that has been the long tradition. The right not to be handcuffed, I said, the right to be protected, the right to live with human dignity, the right of the pavement dwellers, the right to good provident fund, the right not to be subjected to bonded labor, the right to privacy, the right to legal aid, the right against custodial violence of any kind, the right against public hanging, the right against public hanging, all these rights, the right to immediate medical attention, the right to the health and medical aid of workers, the right to a pollution-free air, water, environment, host of cases, MC Mehta 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, before the Supreme Court, and the great judge Kuldeep Singh, also called the Green Judge. Your justices have not failed you. Yes, Christina, justice is available. But Christina, justice is available, but you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to fight for it. The Constitution guarantees you, the statutes guarantee you, but you have to fight for it and have trust in the system, have trust in the law courts, especially the courts of law. Have trust in them. They will not fail you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The interactive session on human rights is very interesting.
Thank you.
It is in full swing. We are running short of time.
Thank you.
At the end, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to both of you for creative, informative, and interactive session. Thank you so much. And thank you, participants, for your active participation and asking thought-provoking questions. Now we'll continue with the validity function. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back after a speech. I, Mrs. Shubhra Palit, Assistant Professor, Loyola College of Education, will be the facilitator for this valedictory session. It is rightly said that don't be afraid of obstacles because it sharpens you, challenges you, and makes you stronger. I hope this impediment in the form of COVID-19 that we are facing serves as an opportunity for growth and development. On this note, we come to the conclusion of our two-day national webinar on learning to lead learners through virtual platform. Now, it's time for the valedictory address by Honorable Vice Chancellor of Xavier University, Bhubaneswar, Dr. Father Anthony R. Uvari, SJ. And before I invite him to present the address, I would like to introduce him. Dr. Father R. Uvari, SJ, having done his post-graduation from XLRI Jamshedpur and PhD from Madras University, is currently working as Vice Chancellor, Xavier University, Bhubaneswar. Dr. Father Anthony R. Uvari, SJ, has over 15 years of rich experience in different fields of OB and HRM. He has published many research articles in national and international conferences and conducted various management development programs. He has also developed several case studies for classroom training, teaching on OB and HRM related issues. Dr. Father Anthony R. Uvari, SJ, is currently associated with many academic institutions of repute, such as board member of XIMB, XUB, and life member of NHRD. LCE family heartily welcomes you, Father. Father, I kindly request you to deliver the valedictory address. Excuse me, Father.
Father, please unmute yourself, Father. Father, please unmute your audio.
Father, kindly unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, Father.
Okay.
Yes, Father.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am privileged to be here in the midst of all learned people. And on the outset, I would like to thank Father Anthony Raj, the principal of Loyola Education, B.Ed College, for inviting me to be the valedictory speaker. I was wondering about the topic, learning to the learners, no? Learning the learners. Last 2 months, being in the university, I have conducted more than 200 Zoom meetings and quite a good number of webinars. I was wondering how this can be taken forward. What are the challenges for an educational institute, a B.Ed college, or an university, for that matter, any reputed institutes? What are the challenges? It is a real challenge at this pandemic time. I would say it's a kind of blessing and in disguise. This pandemic has shaken the hearts and minds of the people all over the world. this COVID-19 has forced the people to think differently. Think differently. This crisis has brought in a lot of innovation and creativity in the minds of people. What are they? To name some of them. It is a crisis time, crisis situation. The migrant laborers, all of us are witnessing the way that things are going, and the food. That is one side. That is a real picture of our country. On the other hand, educational institutes like ours, what are the challenges that all of us face? One is to complete the academic year. Second one is, as I said, that you need to develop an attitude, a mindset, a mind frame to transform oneself, to change oneself. Learning to lead learners, that caption itself, the topic itself, it comprises of all these things that I am talking about. Learning to lead learners. That means we need to have an open mindset to learn. To learn. One is, today we are using the technology to learn, to reach out to the people, to pass the information to the concerned people, concerned stakeholders. For us, the students are our stakeholders, main stakeholders. How can I reach this knowledge of wisdom to these students more effectively and efficiently? More effectively and efficiently. We are used to a particular platform, that is classroom, offline classroom platform, where face-to-face communication, sharing the knowledge was predominantly over the years. We have been used to it, we have been delivering it, we have been contributing. But now the time is demanding us to make a change of mind, change of platform. Now the technology that we have is connecting the people all over the world. The technology seems to be, hello? Yeah, the technology is taking a leading role to reach out these desired information to our stakeholders. Therefore, it is not going to be the survival of the fittest anymore. It is going to be the survival of the quickest. I repeat, post-COVID-19 is going to be, it's not survival of the fittest, it is survival of the quickest. Means how quickly you transform, how quickly you learn the new technology, how quickly you adapt to the new changes, the new normals, what they call it, new normals. Now each institute, each educational institute should come out with what is the new normal in my institute. What is the new normal in my family? What is the new normal with my students? Is the same thing going to continue? Possible. So what should be the next revolutionary changes that we as educationists move from? So therefore, my dear friends, I would strongly urge each one of you to do a kind of personal level, a kind of introspection to change myself, to change my views, to transform to a new way of life, a new way of conducting the classes, a new way of living a normal life. Therefore, they are calling it new normal, new normal. Post-COVID-19, a new normal. What are the new normals for me? That is what each one of us personally should introspect and come out with. And the second thing is that I would like to highlight at this time is, I'm sure you had various topics on human rights and the educational, how you can, ongoing education we can continue. Besides that, what I have experienced last 2 months and what we are doing it here is, online platform gives a wider reach to the people. Wider reach to the people. I am talking now, I can talk to 300 people, which is going to be cost effective. Which is going to be cost effective. Which is going to be preferred over the physical setup. Which is going to benefit the larger interest of the stakeholders. Therefore, it's a challenging time for me. It's a challenging time for me. Let me come out, let me write down what are the new normals that I need to develop for myself personally, in my family, with my students in the classroom, with my faculty and staff in the institute. We as educationists need to come out with quickly. We need to raise up to the occasion. Means to say, we need to come out with a solution as per my context, as per my situation, as per my place, right? So I am very happy to talk to all of you on this topic, and I am also seeing a lot of people are participating in this meeting last 2 days. I must thank Father Anthony Raj for his hard work. Last 1 month, I think he has been planning on this webinar, and many people in the Loyola B.Ed college there, many people have worked on this to reach out to the more participants. Almost 200-300 people participating in the seminar last 3 days. Is not a joke. It's a well thought of, well planned, well coordinated, and I thank each one of you. And also there are great speakers like Paramjod and Shreya and other speakers. I just heard the recorded once, so it's a good, very enriching and enriching experiences to hear all of you. And also, I once again take this opportunity to thank every one of you, and be safe, stay at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, for your valuable and enriching words. And it is very rightly said that survival of the fittest will be replaced by survival of the quickest in the post-COVID-19 period. Thank you, Father. Gratitude is the memory of the heart. So, without much delay, let me now call upon my co-facilitator, Mr. Abhishek Kumar, for the further proceedings. Over to Mr. Abhishek.
Thank you, ma'am. Myself, Abhishek Kumar, Assistant Professor in Loyola B.Ed College. Now it's time for vote of thanks by our respected principal. Before I am requesting him deliver to word of gratitude, let me introduce him. Father P. Anthony Raj a PhD holder on economics from the founder of Loyola TBSR. He has established Loyola Medium subsequently in the same campus. Earlier, he was a founder of Loyola School, Pondicherry in Hadmar district. He worked as a schoolman and moving to B.Ed College as professor in psychology and got appointed as principal of Loyola College of Education, Jamshedpur in 2014. He relinquished the post and became assistant professor at St. Xavier College of Education, Patna, to guide research students at MAd and PhD level. In May 2016, he reverted back in Jamshedpur to take up responsibility of Province Coordinator of Secondary and Higher Education, beside being appointed as Education Research Center as Assistant Province School. Professionally, as a educationist, he continued to serve as a professor of psychology in Loyola College of Education, Jamshedpur. He has written a number of research papers and conducting 80 to 90 seminar, workshop, colloquium for administrators, teachers, and students. Now, I am handing over the Father Principal. Father Principal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abhishek and Mrs. Subra for taking us to the last session, valedictory session, and the climax of the 2 days webinar that we had. Before I begin to give my vote of thanks and thank everybody, I would like to call upon two very distinguished participants to give their views, give their feedback of what they have gained, what are the takeaways from this webinar, 2 days webinar. So may I call upon Mrs. Soni Kumari from Jamshedpur Women's College to give out your views, your feedback on this 2 days webinar. Mrs. Soni, Ms. Soni. Unmute your mic.
Hello, thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to extend a very warm good afternoon to all dignitaries and participants. I am very thankful to Father Anthony Raj, sir, for giving me this opportunity to express my view on this 2-day national webinar. The COVID-19 pandemic, like all major crises, and perhaps more than most, is bound to leave behind lasting changes in the way work and learning takes place. One of the main changes for educators in this time is to lead learners using available web-based tools and online resources. To some, it is a daunting task, and for others, it has been an exciting opportunity. I firmly believe that the 21st century educators has the ability to disseminate, collaborate, support, model, reinforce, reflect, lead, and innovate using educational technology and web-based resources. Topic of this 2-day national webinar is also a learning to lead learners through virtual platform. In this 2-day webinar, we got a chance to listen many eloquent speakers with indeed enlightened us a lot. Yesterday, we learned a new word, pandemic pedagogy, from Arul Sekhar sir. Lecture by Professor Anthony Joseph sir on enhancing mental health during and post COVID-19 was very insightful and motivational. Dr. Shruti Narayan ma'am explained very nicely behavioral changes with an innovative example of T, where T stands for thoughts, E stands for emotion, and A stands for action. We got to know many information about multimedia in organizing and sharing platforms from Dr. Vikramjit Singh sir. So all lectures was indeed very useful and insightful. Today, we got a chance to hear Professor Paramjot Singh sir, who explained very nicely the provisions of Constitution and all legal information used to be in this time of crisis. Dr. Shreya Chakravarthy ma'am explained very beautifully the condition of children and women during this pandemic. Really, women and children are more vulnerable in this time of crisis. This 2-day national webinar was well organized and all lectures and discourse was very fruitful, beneficial and insightful for participants and all educators who were listening this and who were the part of this webinar. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Soni, for your beautiful summary of what you have received, the gist of the 2-day seminar webinar we had. May I call upon Dr. Edward, the HOD of Bharathidasan University Education Department Distance Education, to give out his view, his feedback on this webinar. Dr. Edward.
Yes, Father. Most respected Principal, Loyola College of Education, Dr. Anthony, and the IQAC in charge of all the faculty, Loyola College of Education, and the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Anthony Bubari, and all the resource persons of the both days and all the participants. Very good afternoon, everybody. There is a saying actually, each tree is known by the fruit it bears. I repeat, each tree is known by the fruit it bears. I wanted to make my feedback. Loyola institutions across the world stand excellence in their duties. The performance, whatever activity they take, automatically they excel in all their impressions all over the world. This Loyola College of Education, Jamshedpur, is rarely an inspiring college of education, have meticulously planned and executing all the program in a very good way. For both the days, they have identified very beautiful resource persons, very beautiful, excellent resource persons. And they have arranged all these things, starting from Dr. Monica Uphold and the introduction given by Dr. Principal. Everything was meticulously planned under the leadership of Dr. Anthony, the Principal. It is really amazing to all the participants. As one of the participants, I would like to thank the Principal who has wonderfully organized in a very good manner. And let us all actually give the big hand to the Principal of Loyola College. And I just wanted to appreciate, very good. I wanted to appreciate And today, yesterday, Dr. Joseph Anthony, beautifully taken. And the involvement, dedication of Father Joseph Anthony was excellent. And I was able to see his commitment in delivering all the concept. And what sort of commitment they do have towards the nation and towards the entire society. Everything is actually possible in this thing. And today, Dr. Paramjot Singh and Shreya Chakravarthy, I'm very happy, sir and madam. The sir's involvement was very, very up to the mark. Whatever concept, whatever question is raised, you were up to the mark. I was able to see a gesture, the involvement you have towards the society. Great, sir. The identification of father was great. And madam, your concept was very clear. And your gesture, the politeness, the pleasing of your personality really admires all the participants. And before the validity starts, Dr. Anthony Bubari, Father Dr. Anthony came a very good appreciation to the entire team. Father, as a VC, your appreciation, your word was really, really needed for the entire community. And I have been watching all the faculty in the Loyola College of Education giving introduction about the beautiful introduction. So everything was under the leadership of Dr. Anthony. So at the outset, my appreciation, my heartfelt appreciation to the entire team of IQAC staff and the leader of Anthony. Only one suggestion I wanted to give. Only one suggestion. For the resource persons, there is a saying actually, make a scar like a coconut tree. Whenever you are given an opportunity to meet the audience, before you start your work, brief your introduction, what you're going to do, and how we are going to do it. And that's very, very important. And one more suggestion for the introducers of the resource person, take little time to introduce all others. Okay, that's more than enough because we would like to receive more inputs from the resource persons. All others and things are excellently organized. So hats up to you. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Father Anthony, for the wonderful opportunity given to me for the things. Thank you very much, Father. Thank you very much, Father.
Thank you, Dr. Edward. It's nice to hear from you, such a faraway place, Trichy. Wonderful words of yours will really encourage us to go ahead. And I also thank Tony for your encouraging word of appreciation and applause on us. Now it's time to thank people who have worked hard, who have worked behind the curtain these 2 days, and also precedingly that whole month we have been working on this. I hope this 2 days national webinar on learning to lead learners through virtual platform must have been an enriching and invigorating experience for all of us. As we come to the culmination of the event, I hope that this end trigger many new beginnings. Thankfulness is the highest form of thought, and gratitude is the happiness doubled by wonder. Thus, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. First of all, I would like to thank God for whose benevolence, by whose blessing, we were able to conduct this webinar successfully. I extend my hearty vote of thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Gangadhar Panda, who has to go for his urgent work, so he couldn't be present. Yet he is a patron of our university, patron of our institutions. I would like to thank him for his encouragement and support. I would like to thank the proctor who has addressed us yesterday, Dr. Ashok Kumar Jha, and the CVC, and the Public Information Officer, Dr. Sanjeev Anand, for the encouraging support and help. I would like to specially thank Professor Dr. Anthony R. Uvari, the Vice Chancellor of Xavier University, Bhubaneswar, for having given such a wonderful thoughts of him during this COVID-19 and how to take care of ourselves. As he rightly puts it, it is survival of the quickest. So let us be very quickest in our act. Starting from Dr. Anthony Joseph, Dr. Shruti Narayan, Dr. Vikram Singh, Dr. Geeta Shetty, Professor Paramjit Singh of XLRI, and Professor Shreya Chakravarthy for having given their best of best during this 2 days webinar as speakers, and they touched the hearts of everyone and won the hearts of everyone. Thank you, speakers. I would also thank all the participants of this 2 days national webinar for being with us and being so much with us and appreciating each of the speaker and interacting with them with your questions and queries in a powerful manner. I would like to thank my principal, Father Thomas Alexander, who is there in the screen. Father Thomas Alexander, the principal of St. Xavier's College, Palayam Gotai, who was my M.Ed principal and during my doctorate PhD. That time he was principal, he is still principal. Thank you, Father, for being here with us. My profound gratitude goes to all the faculty members. Thanks to the IQAC coordinator, Dr. Monica Uphold, for coordinating this event. The session facilitators, everybody has done wonderfully well, and they have done their best. Starting from Mr. Benny Lalit Minj, Mrs. Namrata Srivastava, Mr. Nalin Chandra, Mrs. Kanjan Kumari, Mrs. Manju Kujur, Mrs. Tasin, Mr. Chandragyan Tirki, Mrs. Subra, and Mr. Abhishek Kumar. Our office staff worked as technicians in facilitating the sessions. A round of applause goes to Mr. Sujit Bishoy, who worked very diligently, very consistently on making this webinar possible. Mr. Sujit Bishoy gave his 200% into this webinar. I thank his assistants, Mr. James, Mrs. Jennifer, and Ms. Nami Kusum. I do extend my gratitude to all those who have registered, the professors, the doctors, research scholars, the PG students, the UG students, and our YouTube viewers, our own students of B.Ed College, who has been constantly and consistently be there on the screen. Thank you, students, for being with us and the support by way of helping and supporting us. Thanks to the media friends who covered our webinar news for the last 2 days, especially the Jharkhand News channel for putting up a small clip in the main prime time channel, prime time of the viewing. So thank you to all the media persons who have helped us to propagate this theme, learning to lead the learners through virtual platform. I believe that I remembered everybody. I suppose I remember everybody. In case, I'm sorry if I forgot anybody to take out anybody's name, and I thank everybody, one and all, for being with us and being for us. I thank you for once again for making this endeavor a huge success, Have a good day. Thank you. Yoga.
Thank you, Father. Now I handing over our co-partner, Sura ma'am, to continue this session.
Thank you, Father, for your golden words. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Father Anthony R. Uvry SG, for his insightful valedictory address. With this, we come to the end of this two-day national webinar organized by Loyola College of Education, Jamshedpur. As this webinar culminates, LCE family hopes that the flame that we lit will spread the light of hope to many in these testing times of COVID-19. Now, I would like to call upon one of the faculty members, Mrs. Manju Kumari, to deliver the national anthem. I request the participants of this national webinar to kindly rise for the national anthem. Manju ma'am, kindly start.
I think let's begin ourselves. Jan Gan Man Adhinayak Jaya
Jaya Hind, Bharat Bhagya Vidhata, Punjab, Sindh, Gujarat,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I, Dr. Monica Uphold, IQAC Coordinator, thank one and all for your presence in these 2 days national webinar. I really want to thank everybody and especially our principal, Father P. Anthony Raj SJ, for thanking all of us today so well. I thank Father Uvry, the VC of St. Xavier's College, University in fact, sorry, St. Xavier's University, Bhubaneswar, to be here. Now, I hope these 2 days have been very enriching and fruitful to all of you. It was indeed very informative, and I received through the chat box that you all really enjoyed these 2 days. I thank for your active participation. Now is the time for you all to fill the feedback form. The feedback form will be provided to you. The link will be provided to you now in your chat box. The link will also be there in your WhatsApp group. The link is open only for 30 minutes. So kindly do not just quit. Please do fill in the feedback form. Please give us 48 hours time to send you your e-certificates. Your e-certificates will be given it to you by your email. So in the feedback form, there is a section where you have to write your email ID. Please write it properly. We will definitely be, prompt enough to give it to you within 48 hours. The link will be starting very soon. So before you quit, please fill in that feedback form. I hope you all have really enjoyed. Thank you one and all. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm going to forward the link to you as well. This is an announcement for the Loyola staff here. Please, once everybody has filled in the forms and they quit, please stay back. So the Loyola staff people will not exit the